If you haven't watched the other videos in this little series of mine, I'll have them linked below. Otherwise, we're going to get right into it and start where we left off. Now, let me make one thing clear about my videos from now on. I am so tired of having random copyright claims put on my videos. I've said before that I have no intention or ability to monetize any of my videos, and that any money should obviously go to Rooster Teeth. But it becomes an issue when the content is actually blocked, as in it doesn't show up and it is just a waste of time. I make videos to review or analyze certain elements of TV shows or movies, and that's pretty much it. You know, if I put up a clip, it is usually something I'm referencing. It's not content I'm trying to steal. Now, this is just really confusing to me because a 2-second clip of Pyrrha and Mercury fighting got blocked, which doesn't make too much sense to me because there's plenty of videos that I've seen where there's longer sequences of that and there's more interesting cuts of RWBY that don't get blocked, but all mine do. Maybe it's because mine are more negative, I don't know. But if you know how other YouTubers get away with this, feel free to let me know because it's really bugging me. So in the meantime, I can't really put up clips because this is like, my third time trying to upload this video, so I'm just going back with my other thing. Now back to my regularly scheduled bitching. The writing. Writing doesn't just mean scripts. Writing expands into storytelling, character arcs, and plot layout. As someone that writes for a hobby, I understand just how complicated writing actually is. Something I was taught was to let whatever you've written stagnate for a few days, then read it over all the way through afterwards. Does it make sense? Does the story make sense? Do you understand why this character did what they did? Does anything sound or feel out of place? Does anything feel forced? Once you've come to a conclusion, you can either move on with whatever you've written or go back and revise. And there's usually a lot of revisions if you're writing something complex because certain elements just won't stick with you. I don't feel like the writers of RWBY do this. In books, television shows, or movies, the writing will usually either break or make it for the audience, leading to either a successfully driven franchise or a steaming pile of repeated nonsense. RWBY's writing is something strange. Where it originally started out as harmless with direction, it has since begun to take itself more seriously, and the plot is driving more towards real-world problems and less towards the fantasy realm that has been established. Now, the only thing that I can attribute to this or attribute something that's good about this, is initially when the show started out, it was a fairy tale, and then it was happening in reverse, whereas the bad parts start to happen near the end instead of the beginning, and there's no happy ending. That's fine, but you can also tell that the writing has taken a turn to be more like the real world. It's stopped being about the fantasy and more being about our problems and what we have to go through. And for a lot of us, that's not really something we care about. There are plenty of examples of bad writing in this series. What with the recent outrage at Adam's character treatment and the overall lack of direction the show demonstrates, but we can see the real example of this if we go way back. Now, I won't take direct credit for this discovery, as one of my subscribers pointed it out for me, so I appreciate it, Slim Jim. You are a helper in the cause. If we look back to the drop of the black and yellow trailers, we can see the tone set for the majority of the series about these two characters. This was originally written by Monty Oum himself. Yang is a well-rounded combatant who uses her fists to negotiate, and she has a clear-cut quest: finding her mother. Blake is a radical member of the White Fang who has begun to doubt whether or not what they are doing is right, and has since decided to abandon the cause in pursuit of what she feels to be a more noble solution. Those were the character arcs written by Monty, and you can see the direction of these characters and feel their growth through the first 2 volumes. However, after his passing and the replacements at the head of the table, we can see the narrative begin to shift. This happens with Blake and Adam first. Adam is no longer just a mentor or a leader for the White Fang. Instead, he is an abusive, hateful ex that wants nothing more than to destroy everything around Blake. Blake is no longer this powerful, independent person. She is a victim who is terrified at the mere sight of Adam and the horror he could bring to her life, despite fondly looking over a sketch of him as she did initially. Later on, Yang's character shifts as well, from a happy-go-lucky and unwilling to compromise to a victim mentality. She went toe-to-toe with Adam and came up approximately one arm short, and gives up. Now, fans have their differences about Yang's shift in dynamic, and to some extent I feel like her mentality was a fistful of the real world, and somewhat well done. But her approach to it and her unwillingness to accept her current predicament until the plot calls for it was a bit disappointing and out of character for what we'd already established as Yang being the one unwilling to give up. During Volume 6 we see an interaction between Blake and Yang that can be described as awkward. Blake attempts to help Yang as she feels she is suddenly incapable due to her missing arm, but Yang asserts that nothing has changed and everything is fine. To me, that should have been her mindset from the beginning. It might have even felt better if she smiled with obvious difficulty at her situation, and maybe even started crying soon after the fall of Beacon and her realization that she had lost an arm. So why do I bring this up? As I said before, a subscriber mentioned something to me. During the Yellow trailer, Yang literally grabs Junior by his groin and demands information. With Monty's vision in mind, this is an anime-esque gesture that is taken lightly and no different than any other anime where skirts are constantly lifted, men are kneed in the crotch, blood shoots out of your nose, and boobs are groped. It was definitely a more Americanized version of it, but still, the scene meant no harm and was taken at no harm. Nobody even really noticed it. With the new narrative, this would be considered sexual harassment if done to one of the protagonists, and absolutely unacceptable. However, much later we see Adam and Blake fighting, with Adam hitting and striking Blake in a, quote, abusive manner, unquote. This display was considered outrageous, with even cast members finding the behavior despicable. In their character arcs, Adam is attempting to kill a traitor, and it is a war ground. Huntsmen and huntresses and people are fighting for their very lives. But a couple smacks takes center stage, and Blake is now a helpless victim. Without any establishment, Blake and Yang are reduced to victims who have both the same abuser, Adam, and therefore they have every right to triumph over him, mock him, and belittle his personality. We could pry apart characters all day, but the fact remains that at first the shifts in writing were very subtle. The story's telling was still evident, and the series had hoped to continue. However, recently we've been having massive leaps in narrative with clear defining message that doesn't need to be said. It goes directly against Monty Olam's light-hearted gestures and goes into this serious, horribly real world just blah, 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 blah. We have a forcefully inserted LGBTQ couple that just so happened to be related to a main cast member and a major part of the story. Like, don't get me wrong, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I don't care about any of that stuff, love who you love. But these characters were forced, and if you deny that, that's part of the problem, I guess. We have a one-dimensional main villain that is 50 shades of boring, and is just flat out overpowered for no reason. Even the backstory to that main villain just doesn't make sense. We have a villain with real potential being completely wasted. We have a lead protagonist that is hopefully naive and makes some of the worst decisions ever. We have a professional huntsman and secret order member giving up at the first sign of an issue. Since Volume 4, almost nothing done has made any sense at all. If I'm being perfectly honest, the writing in RWBY needs to be cleared up, and I've said it before, but I'll say it again, I don't think they can clear it up, not with how much damage they've done thus far. The best thing for RWBY right now would be to roll with what it has in terms of writing, but in the following volume settle it and revert to a more meaningful story-driven plot. Now I know you guys hate it when I do this, but let's look at movies that suffer from this, and don't take it the wrong way, but we gotta have examples, okay? Ghostbusters 2016 was a complete and total failure. If you watch the original Ghostbusters, you get a feel for this wacky, dynamic group of guys that stumble onto a breakthrough that changes the world as a whole. In a way, it feels a lot like the original RWBY. It was interesting, it had a plot that was driven, and it had the right amount of scary and funny mixed together. Then you give the new writers an opportunity to make their own story from that given content, and what do? They remake everything from the ground up, only starring women. Now, this shouldn't be a problem as a whole. Women being in lead roles has never been an issue, and in some cases, they outclass their male counterparts. However, the writers decided that not only would they completely undo the original timeline and replace it with an all-female cast, but they would go out of their way to insist to the audience that these women are smart, capable, and better than their male counterparts, which it just didn't work out. This is an example of telling and not showing. If you have to tell the audience something and have to remind them of it constantly, you've essentially failed. Whereas when you show the audience something that is relatable or understandable, you form a connection with the audience and that character. I mean, I can make another example of this. The original Star Wars were loved by everyone, but now that Disney has taken over and the direction of the storytelling has shifted, no one is really happy with it. They have institutionalized this horrible way to do movies. They introduced a main character that can do literally anything and everything is just better than all the original characters. And they haven't given a reason why. They just told us that. Compare this to, say, the first 3 volumes of RWBY as the source material with volumes 4, 5, and 6 as the newly issued remake. What I'm essentially saying is that the writers of RWBY have dug themselves a hole, and the only way for them to get out of this is to stop digging, which it doesn't seem like they intend to do, and rather they just want to keep going and hopefully come out through the other side. Pretty much everybody already knows this subject about the writing in RWBY, so I don't want to beat it into the ground too much, but that's just kind of the way that I feel about it. I feel like the writing could be fixed, but I don't think they will honestly fix it. Now, I've decided that the next part will be the last part, and then there will be one more video that is my final thoughts. So the next part, you guys are going to love this one. The next part is the toxic fandom. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about you guys. Tune in, and see you later. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and blah, 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 blah.